Hi everyone, it is Lizzie here from the Zero to Revenue Challenge, and I am joined today by Pooja. Pooja, thank you so much for coming along. I am looking forward to this discussion, and just to give a moment to introduce you to our audience, Pooja is co-founder and CEO of CogniHealth, and she's a background in both neuroscience and experience of working as a carer. Now, I know that you and I are going to get into the nitty-gritty of the early days, but I'd love you to just explain a little bit about the background of CogniHealth. Where did your idea come from?
Yeah, so my story kind of began when I was studying and doing my master's in neuroscience at the University of Edinburgh. And it was really focused on Alzheimer's disease. So I was looking at memory on a protein level. But it was kind of during that time that I attended a conference and met a carer speaking about his experience looking after his wife. And that was kind of the first time I came face to face with what it meant to be affected by dementia. Before that, it was really lab-based, academic, disconnected from the realities of dementia. And after that conversation, after learning more about the difficulties that he was facing and realizing that he wasn't alone in this, it was at that point that I wanted to do something or make a difference. And it was something that I thought it would be a side project, something I can work on and think about going, in the next few months. After I finished my master's and didn't get a job, so I lost my visa and was back in India. I was sharing this conversation with my father, and he was like, why don't you just go for it? See if you have an idea, if there's anything that you can do to help these families, and if you can make a business out of it. And so I took the idea and, spoke to a lot of GPs saying technology is really transforming a lot of industries like financial, but healthcare and specifically social care has kind of been left behind. And on the basis of that, we started using technology as the platform that we could deliver that solution. Around about that time, I came in contact with now my co-founder Pranav, where he found out we could apply for an entrepreneur visa to start the business in Scotland. And through that process, got back to Scotland, and in October, got a job as a part-time carer, both to have that real-life experience of being a carer and seeing if the solution that we had in mind would actually work. And then obviously to pay off rent and food as well. And so for the next 6 months, it was just us kind of understanding and doing that field research, the initial kind of days of, okay, you have an idea, but does it have any value in it? And that's kind of where my story began.
I love that as an origin story. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to understand more about that conversation that you had with your dad and your feelings and emotions around that. When you'd been thinking, well, this is maybe something that will be a side project. What did that feel like when you were actually given the opportunity? Well, maybe this is something that I could do as a business. Like, had it entered your mind before, or not really?
No, I mean, I never thought I would have a business of my own, be an entrepreneur. That was never kind of the plan or aim of what I wanted to do in my career. I thought I would go into a PhD, and that was the academic route that I would take. It didn't seem like a good fit for me, and so when this kind of came about, it was exciting. It was new. It was scary as well, because you were back home after 2 degrees with no jobs, never an easy moment. So it seemed like an opportunity I couldn't say no to, actually. And so I just kind of went for it and started, going to different cities in India and speaking to different GPs and different families. And the more I did it, the more I was interested in what I was doing and the exposure that I was getting, and realized how much I was learning through that process. And that's the part that I enjoyed.
Yeah, for me, those kind of stories are really important to hear as founders and co-founders, because I definitely had the perception at the beginning that founders are people who have dreamed about being entrepreneurs and running a business and owning their own business since they were 3. And they started coding at the age of 4 and all of those things. So I'm non-technical and I'm a co-founder, but I didn't see myself as being someone who would found a business. For me, a little bit like it sounds for you, I was really interested and intrigued by what impact I could make. And this just happened the way that I could make the most impact, the positive impact. And for us, that was with families around the world. But that sounds like it was similar for you in terms of it was an opportunity to do what you wanted to do.
And I kept speaking to kind of my friend who is part of my neuroscience program, and that's kind of how she came on board, where I kept sharing with her what I was finding, and she had her opinion on it and gave a few more ideas. And it was kind of then a natural fit for 3 of us to come together when I was back to Scotland. So how does that story look like for you? How did you guys all meet?
Yeah, it's interesting about shared interests, isn't it? So kind of similar. So Kendaba co-founders are myself, Gelb and Will. And this story, I think, really shows why it's important to have things in common with your co-founders. I met Gelb at university. We were both volunteering for Nightline, so it's an active hours listening service. So we would be on the phones through the night listening to people who would phone up for support and help. And so we had kind of shared values, and that's what we were giving up our time doing at university. And then Gelb met Will, also volunteering. So they were both volunteering at Code Your Future for refugees and asylum seekers in Glasgow. And so I think that's definitely stands a testament to our relationships are built on, we have shared values, we want to support people and make an impact. And that's definitely been important to especially those early stage discussions of what kind of business do we want to build? What does it want to look like? How do we want people to feel when they interact with our business? Whether that is team members, whether that is customers, like that mattered to us. Like our branding wasn't just brand, it was, what do people say about you when you leave the room? And is it something that you want them to be saying about you? So did that factor into your early discussions, like what your mindsets were and what your values were?
Yeah, it definitely did. Julia's kind of worked with MSD patients, so she was a clinical researcher before she started working on this with me. So again, working with patients day in and day out. So she understood that, she knew how to communicate to the families. She knew what it meant when someone got a diagnosis. She understood that. And similarly with Pranav, his grandfather was diagnosed with Parkinson's, so it was a personal connection for him there. And so each of us wanted to make a difference and saw the impact that we could through CogniHealth. And I think that, again, speaking about core values, who we are and what we represent, and how do we want to communicate to the people, what type of solution do we want to bring out, and actually more of the impact that we want to bring through what we're building. So there was a lot of common experiences in that.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to present it as we had all that together and we knew the answers. It's a journey that we went through together and we're definitely still going through. So I think maybe that's a part of it. What I've discovered is that I'm learning so much about being able to articulate my core values and what they mean to me, and what behaviors are then exemplify those core values. But that is not something that I think people should feel like they need to have down before they start the journey. Like, oh, I need to know the answers to these questions. I think for me, it's just an openness to discover that together. Does that sound right?
Exactly. And then, I mean, I think because we understood what we wanted to, the impact that we wanted to make through the company, that was the starting point. And then you obviously had various challenges. So I knew both of them before starting CogniHealth. So it was, it has this both positives and negatives to it, where it's good that you understand their personality, you know who they are, you know how to talk to them, and that relationship is already built, which is a big positive for us. But on the flip side, it also means you don't want to say something that might get in the way of that friendship or that relationship that you had before the company started. So you're quite careful on what you say. And that was kind of the case with us in the beginning, where if I didn't agree, it would be in a very polite way. Whereas now it's a lot more open, and it's been through those open conversations, it's been through those challenging moments where we are where we are and can speak to each other quite openly, quite frankly. But it did take time.
Yeah, I can definitely hear that and understand that story. I think for me, it kind of blows my mind when people talk about the difficulties in communicating with their co-founders or team members. And I definitely understand the barrier, because often we can be raised to not know how to take feedback or give feedback, or not know how to directly say, when you did this, I felt like this, and I would appreciate it if you didn't do that again in the future. And that's something that I've been learning, is that actually putting up those boundaries, explaining. A good example for me was the other day I was speaking to Gelb, and he was saying, oh, when's that event and what time is it and where is it? Really simple question, which I should have known the answer to because I just read the event information page. And I was like, noticed immediately, when you start to feel yourself reacting and you have a bit of self-awareness and you're thinking, oh, why am I feeling frustrated? And amazing that we have this relationship that we're able to speak about that. And so my reaction was, I just realized that I started getting really frustrated with you that we're talking over Slack, which is why I'm doing this. This means Slack. I just realized that, like, I know that you just asked me because off the top of my head, I might I might know. But for me, when I've got a lot of different things going on, what I'll do is I'll decide what's important information to keep in my head and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And the event, time, place, location was something that I'd put in my diary. I'd set a reminder about it. I knew that it was dealt with, and I'd put it aside. So for me, him asking a really simple question was infuriating, because I deliberately decided I have this many things that I need to compute today, and I don't have the brain space to compute it. So I've got. But before, that's the kind of thing that I know in previous roles, it would have just been a little frustration that would have built up, and then you start building resentment. And now I feel really thankful that either I'm able to say, or my co-founders, because of our relationship, are able to call it out and say, hey, Lizzie, it looks like you're not super happy with me asking that. Can you talk me through what's going on? Oh, well, it's because of this. So I was able to explain that, and now he knows, oh yeah, well, I'll just go look it up myself. That's completely fine.
No, I completely agree, and I completely get it as well. Even like the way that we work is really different between the three of us. We work at different paces, like different hours that we work at. So understanding those things, understanding the way that we work, our strengths, our weaknesses. Again, these are challenging conversations, observations, and it takes time to kind of get through all of that initial period of how do we function as a team, how do we represent CogniHealth as one. So yeah, I completely get that.
I know that there's something that you mentioned before that I'd love to dig into, is along with those very deliberate, difficult conversations and not dodging them, but really meeting them head forward. How do we go about discussing our own strengths and weaknesses, our team's strengths and weaknesses, especially in the beginning when roles could be quite fluid, quite unclear? How was that journey for you?
I think in the beginning we were all doing everything, and while it's fine, and we probably still are all doing everything, there were times when there was communication gaps, or someone was meant to do something and the other person did the other half, and so you didn't have one person who knew the knowledge of everything that was going on. And so there were points where me and Julia would work on the product, and so if Pranav wasn't working on that bit and then was asked a question on it, there was a few communication gaps, and that was, even though we were slightly kind of going towards the things that we were good at or liked, it didn't mean that we didn't do the other parts or didn't communicate about that. And so communication was something that we put a lot of time working on, and kind of took some time apart, where what were the things that we understood were our roles or our responsibilities. Didn't mean that you were left alone to do it and were expected to finish it, but more of, okay, I'm in charge of making sure that the product gets to this stage. And it means that I can tell you, okay, can you help me with this? Or can you, do this for me? And that's completely fine. It just meant that I was responsible for it to get finished by this date that we set out ourselves to do. And again, to get to that point, to understand that this is how we're going to function, understanding the platforms that we were going to use to communicate. So from starting with WhatsApp to becoming a bit more Google Docs to leaving comments, and then knowing how we work. Because even if we worked at different times of the days, we could go on, do our work, leave a comment that this needs to be reviewed. And that's kind of the system that we started building up, having Jira to make sure that we were getting through the list of tasks that we had. So it was just finding the right tools, making sure that communication was in place, and that everyone knew what everyone was working on, and it wasn't, oh, what have you done today? Or I didn't know you had finished this and I was meant to check it. And so obviously you ran into those early on, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely the early frustrations of what's the process, who's leading on this, what does done look like, because my version of done is different from your version of done.
Yeah.
All of those things are absolutely the basis for you being able to build a product or a business, right? And they take deliberate care and effort.
Yeah, go ahead. No, and that's also the thing about being an entrepreneur, where you say you want to do X, or you want to, let's put it as X, but you don't know how to do it. So you start from, how do I first do it? Then to actually going ahead and doing it. So again, time that it takes to do a task, understanding that, and the expectations of what can you realistically achieve and expect from the other person. So those were, again, things that I think took quite a bit of time to know and figure out. And we're still, obviously, we don't have everything figured out yet, but it just means that we have a process. But it takes time to build a process in itself. Usually I think within corporates or within a different organization, those processes are already in place. And then when you're assigned a task, you kind of work with that process. But here you're creating something from scratch, from nothing, and doing something that fits every person in the team that you're working with.
Right, it fits every person, it fits the stage of development that you're at. And I know for us, it had to then grow with the team when the team grew, right, with different personality types, or not to overload new team members with information, or actually documenting what we've done, because at the beginning documentation wasn't as important because we had to do it fast. So being able to say, well, does this structure fit this time, place and environment and the context, or does the structure need to change? So I think an important part of that is having a review, whether that's an official, like we're going to put a date in the diary of 6 weeks time to make sure, like, is this working for us using the Google Docs and writing comments, or do we need to do another way? Or whether it's just somebody always remembers, like, I just want to check, is this process working for everybody?
Yeah.
Definitely helps kind of teasing out those issues, right? And it enables us to actually do the growth that we need to do.
That's a really good point. Like, your processes change over time depending on the stage. And that's, again, from when you were in the early days, in the first couple of months, you wanted to get things out there to test it. And so you're not going to spend time trying to fix the process so it's perfect. You just want to get it out there. And that's very different to now what we have. We have a built product. And so the mechanisms or the process that we use right now is very different from what we used, 6-9 months ago, and will probably be different going forward. So you have to keep looking back at it, keep seeing if it works for where you are right now.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the tendency for some people to over process. So putting a process onto something too early because you don't enjoy chaos. And that can slow things down. Or there's the opposite, and taking chaos too long and saying, well, actually that's slowing down scalability because now we have no processes. So recognizing, I know this is conversations we had, was, well, what are each of our skill sets, and who's going to be the person to check, like, so I might be too fast to jumping into action. Someone else might be too reflective and not jumping into action. Where do we meet in the middle? And do you have that as well? Things that or you can rein me back on this and I'll rein you back on that.
Yeah. No, we kind of identified that as our strengths and weaknesses in each person, where, one of us works in trying to make sure that things are done on time and going through the list, while someone else might have the skill to actually read through everything in very detailed, and that can be as important as making sure it's done. And so to getting that balance, it's so key, and just kind of keep communicating. I keep saying this, and I've repeated this several times, but it's the people that make the idea work, right? And if they don't talk to each other, if they don't understand each other, it becomes so difficult. And people need to make sure that they're happy working on what they're doing, the way that it's being done, and the timelines that you've set. So I can say, like, I think it should be done next week, but they should have the ability to speak up, to share that, no, it's going to take a bit more time than that. A, because they may have done it before, or B, I'm just being very optimistic.
Right. Having a team who can challenge and say, actually, Lizzie, you always think something can happen in half the time that it actually can. And what you do in setting that deadline is you stress us all out and we don't meet either of the deadlines. So actually, I'm always going to pull you back and say, this is a realistic estimate. These are the blockers and the barriers in place, and this is the support I need. And that's what I need to hear from my team. Like, I need to hear that realism. In the same way as they need visioning and future planning from us, right?
Exactly. And again, like tasks that are, more research-based, that are doing things on your laptop versus the whole networking outside, building the brand, doing those sort of things. So understanding what are we all comfortable doing, which parts are the things that we enjoy and want to do and want to build that skill. So the other thing is, what do we want to grow and be better at? And so they're very different parts of the company: legal, financial, the marketing, the brand, and then the product. And, all that requires different skill sets, and you can't do everything. And so you pick and choose based on where you want to grow, what you're good at, and taking that. And that's kind of how we ended up dividing the work that we do now. I mean, like I said, we were kind of doing everything, but now it's kind of honing in on who's really responsible for the product, who's really responsible for getting those user numbers high, who's responsible for making sure there's money in the bank account. So
Yeah, and I know that you've repeated and we've talked about communication, but I think the ability for a founding team to be able to communicate really reflects well when we go out for investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, early stage investors are investing in a market that they can see and in a founding team that they know will be able to pivot when they need to pivot and be resilient enough to last the length of time, right? So have you found that when you're talking about investment, that actually your founding team and the way that you work is important to that?
Yeah, I mean, the first, what investors say are the 3 T's, and one of the T's is team. And so you want to present yourself in a way that you know your roles, you know what your responsibilities are and the strengths that you bring to your team, and displaying that to investors. But at the same time, I think the reality and perception of when you go for investment, when something that happens that was not in your control, that just kind of slipped and it didn't work, and now you're in a very different position, and kind of the turmoil and the frustration that you feel, you only show that to your team. And then we've gotten to a point where we can, but when you go and pitch to investors, it's to show that we're good, that despite all of the downfall, we're really positive. And that might not be the case. You have your days where something may go wrong, and for the next 24 hours you just stay away from work because you're that upset or you're that frustrated. And I think it's important to realize that, yes, when you're going in front of investors, you want to show that you're a strong team. That's the point. But in reality, it's okay to not be that.
Yeah, it is holding those kind of two realities in your mind at the same time, and being okay with that, and I guess being comfortable with knowing which sphere are you sharing what information with is really important. And do you see any issues when you're looking at fellow founders, or you're scrolling through your LinkedIn, or you see the Google alerts that, hey, this startup, this startup, and this startup all received funding recently, and this is what they're celebrating. How do you feel when you see that, and what do you think is a useful thing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you see a lot with social media. It always has its pros and cons. And in the startup world, when you see a lot of people getting press and getting investment, you feel, or at least I felt, that I was lagging behind. That we don't have private investment in, and we don't have as much press, or we're not winning as many things, and that can play on your psyche a little bit. And it kind of makes you question, should you be going for investment now? Should you be doing what everyone else is doing? You want to have that same sort of level of presence as your fellow startup colleagues and things like that. And though it may be right for them to raise investment at that point, it does not mean that it's right for us right now. And it's really questioning, where are we financially? Why do we need money? When do we need it? And for what? And if you have those answers and you know them, I think that's when investors really believe in you, believe your team, that you know what you're doing, you know what you want, and you know your business the best. And it's really difficult not to be affected by press. But it's just kind of being like that conviction of, what you're doing, and you have this goal, and you know what it's going to take, and the timing of it. And it's just to believe in that, really.
I think there's a huge part of what you say there about the ability to recognize within ourselves when we're comparing ourselves to somebody else's journey, to someone else's business, and I guess the toxic nature or the toxic potential of social media and reading about other people's successes. And is definitely true, isn't it? You can get caught up so easily in the hustle mentality of, I only sleep 4 hours, I wake up, I go for runs, I drink my smoothie, and then I have this amount of deep work, and I'm sitting there thinking, deep work is a challenge, and I definitely need to find time for it. But also, I have customers pinging me on intercom all day, every day, and I'm getting back to them immediately, and I'm speaking to them, and I'm thinking, who has this life where it's all structured and boxed and compartmentalized? And actually, there's an element of, I need to make sure and focus on what's working for me, what does work for me, what's sustainable for my way of living and for my business. But that can be a challenge, that you hear the inner voice, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of where your work life really impacts your personal life. And that's the moment where you think that getting investment is the definition of being successful. And so you might want to just keep working towards that when it might not be right for you. You don't want to be judged by how many rounds of investment you got, but actually the impact that you set out. Going back to the beginning of that conversation that we spoke about core values and the impact that we want to make, that's how you should be defining your success. Are you actually making that difference to people affected by dementia? Are the families benefiting from that? And going back to how do you schedule your day where it looks, starting the morning with a run and then a smoothie and the healthy life, and then working from 9 a.m. to 5 or 6 and then having that evening off. No, it does not. I mean, my life does not work like that. I would love for it to, but deadlines creep up, things take longer than you want it to. Things go wrong, and then you have to deal with that, and your to-do list just remains as it is, and then you start at 8 p.m. on that list, and it just that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think all we can ask of ourselves is just to have that self-awareness for when it is the time to switch off those notifications and shut off, or when it's the time to recognize that this is a fire that I cannot fight just now.
Yeah,
I don't have the time, the space, the mental energy, or actually this is something I can delegate. You spoke before about understanding each other's roles and each other's strengths, and even as an early stage team there are other things that we can delegate. So whether it's using virtual assistants or working with students for an internship, there are ways that we can maximize the time that we have and make sure that we're focusing on the things that we are making the most impact in.
Yeah, definitely. And understanding how you work the best, right? In the beginning, I thought having meetings right in the morning means that I would be up earlier and get, off the bed and into work zone. But meetings make me quite tired, and it means that I can't be productive, the second half of the day when you want to get a lot of work done. And so realizing that and putting, okay, let me get through my emails and those things off the checklist in the morning and then schedule meetings in the afternoon. So again, time prioritization, giving it, making sure that you delegate the work to your team members, all of that are something that I completely understand.
So I've really appreciated the kind of chat that we have wandered through, because I think we've covered some just realistic experiences from the early days. And I would love to hear, just to finish up from you, what the next kind of 6 months for CogniHealth look like.
So, the product is out there in the market. You can download CogniCare for free from the Android, Apple, and now through Alexa. So we're really happy to get all of that out there and in the testing zone. But now the next 6 months, just market that we exist, who we are, and making sure as many families who are affected by dementia know about us and become part of our journey. And hopefully we can make that positive impact and improve their quality of life.
That's really exciting. Thank you. And to everyone who's watching, I know that Pooja is over on our Slack community, so I'm sure you would be open to having conversations about the things that we've raised today, whether that's finding your co-founders, having difficult conversations, or learning what you work out best. That was an awkward way of putting the question. How you work best. Can you tell I've done many, many interviews today? So yes, thank you very much for your time this morning, Pooja. That's Pooja, co-founder and CEO of CogniHealth, and we will catch up soon.
Thank you, Lizzie. Bye.
Bye.